So, uh, yeah, hello guys. For those of you who don't know me, I am Maverick. I also go by my ecclesiastical name, Father Isaac. And anyone who's paid attention to my channel knows that my channel has dealt with Christian universalism, and those type of things. Now, I'm not wearing my collar. I decided that that I'm probably going to keep my collar. Maybe might record with it next time. But there are a few reasons why I decided not to do that. I'm not going to get into it. Um, you know, I've been meaning to do some videos because I unlisted all of my videos. Now, for those of you who don't know what it means to unlist a video, it's essentially making it private, something like that. I could be wrong in the way that I'm explaining it. I'm just telling you what I did with the videos. I'm not very clued up, on the mechanics of making YouTube videos, but um, I unlisted them, and basically what that meant was you could still watch the videos, but I had to send you the link. So it's kind of like making it private. So I've started like making them public again, and there's a reason for that. Um, I just decided that today was going to be the day that I um, kind of explain my situation and things like that. And I think I haven't made videos since like 2024. Now, 2025 was a transitional year for me. So yeah, I went through a lot of things spiritually. Um, it was also with like a series, a season of rehabilitation, and nothing to do with drugs. What I mean by rehabilitation is I was existing in a transitional phase of my life. I've been in Korea for almost 7 years. It's going to 7 years. This is my seventh year. And I realized with everything that happened in my life, I had visited home in 2024. So I was in Cape Town. For those of you who don't know, I'm South African. Um, had that transitional period of my life and realized I wanted to change some things, and I had to think about the direction of my channel. Now, I want to speak a bit about some things about uh, my involvement with alternative subgenres, and also, how that relates to me as a spiritual person. Now, for those of you who can see, like, I always wear the Varkors. Not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but the Varkors, the Wolf Cross, and yeah, it's a part of my aesthetic. And I'm actually wearing a Marduk t-shirt now. If you like black metal music, and if you know me, it might not be that surprising, but wanted to do this video on um, on what it means for me to be spiritual, how that relates to my subcultural involvement, and how I reconcile that with being a priest in the ISM. Now, for those of you who don't know, I've always been into heavy metal music. Um, in my charismatic Protestant days, um, I was in, for a short while, I was involved with a pastor that was also into metal and stuff. So, the alternative subgenre has been a part of my spiritual development. When people say, "Well, it's just music that I like," it isn't like that for me. Um, I really do see my my involvement in alternative music, and particularly extreme metal music, as an outflow of my spiritual, practice. So yeah, now I put some notes together. Um, you know, I'm wearing a Margic t-shirt. For those of you who know, Margic is part of a scene of extreme metal music known as black metal, the black metal scene. And the black metal um, genre is known for being quite anti-religious, anti-Christendom. And so people wonder because in 2025, I think it was 2025, we in 2026. See, I don't even remember this stuff anymore. In October, I think October 2025, I had watched a black metal show, and this show is known for being, anti anti the establishment of Christianity, and so people find it um, interesting. How does a guy who who is a spiritual practitioner who you know prays and he's written theological articles, who has his theological degree, how does a guy like this get into black metal? And I wrote some things. Um, you know, I I entitled this video "A Theology of Black Metal," and I wrote a couple of things down here. So if it sounds like I'm reading, just forgive me for that, because I do find it hard to to just make this video flow, because oftentimes when I make videos, as I've said before, I mean, if anyone's watched any of my other videos, sometimes you overthink the things that you say because people are watching you, the camera's watching you, and so you're always like, oh, did I say that right? Or you forget to say something and then you have to make another video, so that's what it is. Um, yeah, so the first thing that I want to get on about that I want to get to on the issue of black metal is that black metal is known for being satanic. And extreme metal has always been satanic, and not satanic in the sense that they necessarily worship Satan, but it did use Satan, the devil, um, the traditional understanding of what the devil is, to write and play about, you know, topics of rebellion and empowerment. So Satan was seen as that figure of, we don't care what the church says. We don't care what the establishment says. Now, if you grew up in South Africa or the United States or stuff where Christianity has always been the dominant religion, you'll understand that. Now, um, this is probably um, the answer to many people's questions is usually found um, in that train of thought. So if you want to understand why many Christians or many religious people like metal, you got to start there. It's not about metal or being anti-religious per se, but it's about a refusal to be silenced by dogmatism, institutionalism, and we can get into all of that stuff. So I said something. I think it was the um, yeah, the band Rotting Christ, Sakis Tolis. You know, if you look at his critique on institutionalism and control, that's kind of what black metal is against. Because a lot of people that are involved with black metal, they have this aversion, this hatred of institutional Christianity, because, or I shouldn't even say Christianity, but Christendom, because it's colonial. It's a colonial concept. For them, when they think of Jesus Christ, they think of Jesus Christ as someone, as a symbol of the destruction of their culture, of colonialism, of having their culture destroyed. And so they are unable to receive that version of the Christian story. And so they just, they just lock in and they say, we don't want this stuff. And so if you're not understanding that, um, that even a movement away from God, even a movement towards atheism, even a movement towards Satanism is actually a movement towards the divine. If you don't understand that, then I think we're speaking different languages. So yeah, Sakis Tolis, yeah, he basically is one figure in the black metal community. It's a Greek black metal band, and he's like, well, he doesn't care if you have a belief and stuff, but it's trying to control what he needs to think, control the way that he needs to act without giving him a good reason to do so. And so that's what it is. For those of you who do know, I don't have the book right now. Where is it? But people know, based on my videos on universalism and stuff, that I really like David Bentley Hart. So his book, That All Shall Be Saved, Heaven, Hell, and Universal Salvation, the book from 2019, he makes a very radical statement, but I don't think that statement is radical if you look at his argument. And he says that every act of the human will, even when expressed as explicit atheism, Satanism, or rebellion, is driven by an implicit desire for God. So basically, there's this concept that, if I put two doors in front of you, and in one of the doors there's $1 million, and in the other door there's a hungry lion. If you don't know which one, um, if you don't know which one is the door with the $1 million, is that freedom? Um, so because we are in constant motion, no one, evil is seen as, when we speak about ontological evil, well, we shouldn't even call it ontological evil, but when we speak about evil, something that is meaningful evil, it isn't based in rationality. Therefore, if someone chooses evil, really chooses evil, if he chooses hatred against love and so on and so forth, this is a statement of madness. It isn't a statement of freedom. Um, you know, Jesus said that the one who sins is the slave to sin, and if you believe the truth, it will set you free. Only the truth can set you free. Believing a lie can never set you free, and that's a very basic concept. So yeah, it's very very important to understand that. So in the notes, so like I wrote down, and basically that was a paraphrase about what I said. Every act of human will, but it's basically what David Bentley Hart says in his book. And he says, because God is not a finite object inside the universe, but rather being itself, truth itself, goodness itself, and beauty itself. Anytime a rational creature seeks anything desirable, freedom, knowledge, rebellion against hypocrisy, artistic perfection, justice, they are fundamentally reaching for God, whether they realize it or not. So bands might, like Vatain, um, Vatain is rooted in chaos Gnosticism. And for those of you who don't know what Gnosticism is, the early Christian Gnostics, because Gnosticism was the Gnostic Christians were early forms of Christianity, and there was an overlapping theology. I'm simplifying a lot of things, but another kind of Christianity that Marcion taught. But basically, it was the idea that the Creator God was evil, and basically Jesus came to save us from the God of the Old Testament, or the God, or the demiurge, right? And so the God of this world is seen as as an evil God because he imprisons us. And so to find true liberation in Gnosticism is to have the divine spark in you reach and move towards the transcendent true God. That's what the Gnostics believed. And the Satanists or the um, bands like Vatain and stuff, or the Chaos Gnostics, they called him the Luciferian Chaos Gnostics, anti-cosmic Satanism. That's what they believed. So they believe in a variant of something that many Christian sects back in those days, in the ancient times, believed. So I'm not saying that I believe in that. I'm just saying that that's the mindset. So when they speak about evil, if they speak about dark things and stuff, black metal speaks a lot about that stuff. About, Vatain, one of the best Vatain albums, I think, is The Lawless Darkness. And in this album, they speak about holy evil. Now, again, these are subjective terms. These are thematic terms to try and explain what they believe. And so Vatain would obviously think, from a more objective perspective, that what they worship in their music is the good. So it's true alignment with who they see as the true God, and they would obviously reject the creator God. But unless you understand that concept, that art is always, most of the time, I think, art represents a movement of the person towards God, the true, the good, and the beautiful, Satchit Ananda, being consciousness and bliss. So, yeah, so no one can choose evil purely as evil, right? Because otherwise it's madness, it's based in ignorance. And no one can reject God as God. When an atheist rejects God, when a Satanist blasphemes, they are rejecting a distorted concept, an idol, or a caricature of God. And honestly, as a Christian universalist, I can say I definitely don't believe in the God that the vast majority of Christians believe in, because it's a God that sends people to hell indefinitely, um, for who knows what reason. So I have this quote here from David Bentley Hart. He says, to choose anything at all is to choose on the basis of some end that one takes to be good, and to seek the good in any ultimate sense, whether one knows it or not, to seek God. God is the absolute transcendent good and prompts every act of the will. Thus, one cannot rationally choose against God, because God is the very condition of rational choice. That's in his fifth meditation. So, the as anti-cosmic Satanists, when you get into their cosmology, what they are rejecting is what they perceive to be an evil God. And at the same time, when they say that they worship evil, they're not using evil in a literal way. They're speaking about a God that transcends everything else, the lawless darkness. And we can get into this, but that's the first thing that you need to understand when you ask, well, how can I listen to some of the music? Now, I really do believe that the music you listen to influences who you are. But now I want to get to the other part of this, because people are like, well, some of these bands speak about Satan. It seems like they're worshiping the devil, blah 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 blah. When you understand Satan, right? Like the Old Testament, the Tanakh, has a concept of Satan, and for those of you who don't know, I don't believe in the univocality of the text of Scripture. But the pillar one that you must understand is Satan is a progressive theological development. So Satan is just a title, Ha-Satan. So I wrote here, in early Hebrew thought, the Satan was not the supreme horned archdemon of modern pop Christianity. It was an office, a function, and a title inside Yod-Heh Vav-Heh's divine court. Now, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was just the name of the God of the Old Testament that most scholars construct together as Yahweh. Some people say Yehovah, Yehovah. Some people say Jehovah, but we don't know with absolute certainty. Some people just say Yah, which is a theophoric um, theophoric contraction. Um, yeah, theophoric abbreviation of the divine name Yod Hey Vav Hey. So when the first time you see Hasatan, it's in Job 1, and he's the accuser who works for Yahweh, right? And so he works for God. And the second temple shift, when you read the book of Enoch, there's a lot of theology that gets spouted upon. And so Satan is then the prince of the opposing kingdom of God. You can read that in John 12:31. Now I'm going to get into the key text. Job 1, verse 6 to 7. Now I'm going to put some of these things in some of the key text in the YouTube, comment bar. I don't even know what they call this stuff, but you can. There's more information that I put on this. If you want to, scroll down and look at what verses I use, because I don't think I'm going to put it up. I'll just put it down here in the comment section or something. But Job 1, verse 6 to 7, and Zechariah 3, verse 1 to 2. In the Hebrew text, the word is written with a definite article, so it's Ha-Satan, the Satan, the accuser, the prosecutor. He reports directly to God, and he acts under his explicit commission. So he's not a rogue anti-God, right? This is not an evil guy. This is just, God's police officer, basically. So there, you speaking about a good guy, right? The Satan. In Numbers 20:22, the angel of the Lord stands in the road as an adversary, as a Satan against Balaam. Here, the holy angel of Yahweh acts as a Satan. So here we have a good guy. Another one, Numbers 22:22. So I just want you to think about that. Even so the angel of the Lord, many people interpret this in the early churches being a reference to the pre-incarnate Jesus before he becomes a man. So Jesus was the Malach Yahweh, Malach Adonai. That's the Hebrew term for him. And it's a good guy. In First Chronicles 21:1 and Second Samuel 24:1, there's a classical textual evolution. In Samuel 24:1, Yahweh's anger incites David to make a census, to take a census. In First Chronicles 21:1, Satan stands up against Israel and incites David. So just look at that. So over centuries of theological development, functions once attributed directly to Yahweh's dark or testing side were delegated to a distinct adversarial figure, the Satan. But here we do see Satan is a role, it isn't a name. Now, second thing that I want to get into, and this is why saying I worship Lucifer, if someone says that, it's a bit more complex than that. Now, I want to know from you, where does the Bible call the devil, the figure that we call the devil, where does it call him Lucifer? I'm going to give you a hint. Nowhere. The popular idea that Lucifer is the proper name of the devil is a total lie. It's a misconception. Lucifer simply means the light bringer or the day star, the morning star. Phosphorus in Greek, Hallel in Hebrew. Now I wrote this down in English. I don't actually have the Hebrew here, but I'm sure I think it's Hallel. I don't know if it's Hallel. Probably not. I'm not going to make up my own stuff here. But in fact, early Christianity applied this directly to Jesus Christ. Do you hear that? the morning star. This was the title of Jesus. So a lot of the text that we use to try and say is a try to um, say is about Satan has nothing to do with Satan. Isaiah 14:12, the Latin Vulgate, and I would assume, and then obviously the King James Version says something like this: "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" So the original Hebrew reads, the original Hebrew of that particular verse in Isaiah 14:12 says, "Hallel ben Shechar, shining one, son of the dawn," a poetic mock dirge aimed at the arrogant king of Babylon, not the devil, not a fallen archangel. Jerome translated Hallel into the Latin Vulgate as Lucifer. Now, when this was does get used to refer to Satan, it doesn't get used to refer to Satan literally, but metaphorically. It's like an allegorical type of, well, Satan fell down like this. Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall down. I saw the Satan fall down like lightning." And so it's this Satan, is an angelic being, morning star. That's how they tap it. But there's no evidence that this has anything to do with the devil, right? So 2 Peter 1:19 says, and it's one of my favorite verses, "Until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart." The morning star is referring to Jesus Christ rising in our heart. Not it's telling us that until the day dawns and Lucifer rises in your heart. Who's he? Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus Christos. Um, Revelation 22:16. "I, Jesus, have sent my angel. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright morning star." Again, this is the equivalent thing. Lucifer, bright morning star. Jesus, bright morning star. So the ancient Western church sang praise to Christ using the word Lucifer during the Easter Vigil. So it says, "May Lucifer find its flame burning." So they would say, "May the morning star find its flame burning. That morning star who never sets, Christ your son. May Lucifer find its flame burning. That Lucifer who never sets, Christ your son." Something also interesting. There was a saint in the history of the church called Saint Lucifer. It had nothing to do with this devil figure that's a later theological development. So I do think that a lot of the music that we see in black metal is sometimes cartoonish, or if it is serious, it doesn't. It's a movement towards the true God. So I wrote this down. In black metal's obsession with Luciferian illumination, there is an ironic theological truth. The true light bearer tearing down hypocritical human institutions is the apocalyptic Christ himself. Now, very interesting, the image of a snake, right, that gets used in black metal all the time. The snake gets used as a symbol of Jesus. So I just want to get this on here. As the serpent is lifted up. I just want to read this. So this is John 3, verse 14 to 21. "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believe in him should not perish but have eternal life." So if you've seen the iconography of the snake with a cross, the Israelites were bitten by snakes, and the only way that they could find healing was to look on the snake on the rod, the snake on the staff. Again, it's a symbol of Christ. So, which is why some Gnostic Christian sects have even said that the snake in the Garden of Eden is Jesus Christ. And there are some traditions, textual traditions that speak of the God of Genesis 1 and of being this the God of Genesis being this bad deity. At least some textual traditions that speak about it being this evil deity and the serpent as being the one that um, offers salvation. Now, obviously, this is a chaos gnostic kind of mindset, and I'm not saying I don't really know about that. I would hold to the traditional view of that, but then again, um, I have somewhat of an interesting pot, perspective on that, especially in terms of the text being so diverse. If we look at the Bible as a source text, not the scriptural layer of that, but yeah. So black metal often attacks a rigid, Western, hyper institutionalized Christianity. And I use the word Western loosely. So this can also refer to Christianity in Eastern Europe and so on and so forth. Demonstrating that Christianities have historically contradicted one another strips imperial Christianity of its claim to absolute authority. And I believe that. There's so many people. I'm a practicing priest in the ISM. And one of the things that's great about us is that we participate in micro denominations. But yeah, uh, I got some verses here just to think through this. So the early church immediately fractured over the Torah and the Gentiles. Paul publicly confronted Peter over hypocrisy. There was never a single monolithic Christianity. So when people are saying, well, you're listening to anti-Christian music, well, it might not be the Christianity that I practice, if I can even call it Christianity, but Christendom is vast. And there's so many people. This is why I've written about this. Love Unrelenting, for any of you who've seen the video that I've done. But I wrote about this beyond universalism, about why I sometimes find it difficult to answer the question of whether or not I'm a Christian. So, imperial Christianity versus desert martyr Christianity. Now, to be honest with you, there are some saints received in both the East and the West that I have a moral issue with. Like, I don't know if I can endorse these people. I'm not going to mention their names because then people are going to get upset with me. But Christianity becomes the religion of the Roman state under Constantine, a tool of empire, military conquest, and forced conversion. Um, the desert fathers fled the Christianized cities into the wilderness, viewing the imperial church as corrupt. Now, I am not sure if this is true. But I know that the Desert Fathers, I'm not sure if that's the reason why they left, but there's enough in church history to make me think that there were imperial orthodoxies that seek to establish itself as the truth. And I think it is very clear that, figures like Clement of Alexandria and Origen of Alexandria were unjustly targeted. Um, But let's continue. Patristic Universalism versus Western Augustinianism. Obviously, I hold to Patristic Universalism. I do not believe that there's this God that will send people unto everlasting conscious torment and blah 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 blah. I just don't think that's a meaningful moral vision of any kind of theology. As we explored earlier, I'm just reading from my notes. The early Eastern fathers like Gregory of Nyssa, Isaac the Syrian. I was named after Isaac the Syrian in my ecclesiastical name, but they taught universal salvation, universal healing. As to where Augustine, Alslam, and Calvin constructed a machinery of eternal torment and penal substitution, which I just don't think is good theology. But now I want to get into the final point, and I don't want to go longer than an hour, but um, me, liking black metal, before I get to this point, I like black metal because black metal confronts the darkest parts of the human psyche. And as someone who considers himself spiritual, someone who is interested in the meaning of life, black metal gives me an outlet of release that very few other musical genres do. So, I have this is actually a band, that's Christian, but Crimson Moonlight. Um, Good stuff. You're thinking about the darkest part of our human existence gets confronted in metal, whether it's Black Curse, Titan Blood, Marduk, Algazanth, Dragged into Sunlight. I mean, I love all of those bands, but it shouldn't be seen as something that I'm trying to fit into my spiritual life. It is the natural outflow of someone who is inquiring, someone who cares about the meaning of life, someone who thinks deeply about life. Black metal is just the natural outflow of that. So, what about Norwegian black metal? I like Norwegian black metal, but I'll say this. Nordic anti Christianity and black metal are not merely edgy rebellion or just Satan worship. They are an ancestral counter response to spiritual and cultural colonialism. So when you look at that, you're able to understand why do they have an aversion towards um, these things. Well, it might not have anything to do with who Jesus is truly. It might not have anything to do with that. It might be that what they're reacting against is what these things represent. And we can speak about egregores, we can speak about the communal perceptions of, God and Jesus and things like that. You can use the Bible itself to argue that God's grace, wisdom, and presence were never restricted to the Western Christian Empire. And I think that's very clear. And black metal is a work of decolonial theology. It's a refusal to let go of one's past as Vikings, as the Norse, as the Scandinavian peoples, and saying we don't want to do this. That's why there's some great music in folk metal. I One of the best shows in 2025 that I went to was from Arcona. I didn't actually open this because I just listened to all of this music on YouTube Music. But this this folk, black and folk type of band. Yeah. Um, so yeah, in this kind of context, Jesus Christ was brought not as a liberation or liberator from sin, but as the flag of a foreign imperial empire. And this is why for Scandinavian peoples you know, that are interested in black metal and that like black metal, it is decolonial black um, backlash. It is a work of theology. So I just want to share some things. So God assigned spiritual guardians to the various nations and lands. Indigenous ancestral traditions had their own authentic, allotted connection to the divine realm within the cosmic order. Imperial Christendom's attempt to flatten every culture into a single Western Latin mold violates the original divine order. Now, we can get into this whole debate that you'll hear about sometimes about how saints were erected in the place where they perceived there to be false gods, and are all foreign religious systems just bad in totem. I think that there's a wiser way to go about this, and I think it's definitely more complicated than well, we don't know about this god, so it's a demon. I don't think that's a responsible way of looking at it. But Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 to 9, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the numbers of the Beni Elohim. But Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob. So Um, there's a lot of discussion about this, but Yahweh, it would seem, is being spoken of in a different way from the Most High. And I'm not going to get into that theological development, but Acts 17:26 to 28. From one man he made all the nations. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said. So this is Acts 17, verse 26 to 28, just to recap that. Paul quotes pagan Greek poets, Horatius and Epimenides. I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry, to prove that Gentiles already possess divine truth in their own cultural heritage before missionaries arrived. This is important. So Melchizedek and the pagan saints, Genesis 14, verse 18 to 20. Melchizedek was a Canaanite king of Salem who worshipped the God Most High before Abraham received any covenant. So God was active, revealed, and worshipped outside of the lineage of Israel long before institutional Christianity existed. So it would seem that there was always a sense in which the wisdom of God was present in all things. And we can get into the prevenient grace of God before the incarnation. And even to speak about before the incarnation isn't something that I like, because I don't think it's a good way of thinking about the incarnation. But Malachi 1:11, my name will be great among the nations, from where the sun is to where it sets. In every place, incense and pure offering will be brought in my name. So Yahweh affirms that sincere, awe-filled reverence offered in other lands and cultures is received by him, shattering the claim that only baptism into a Western church grants access to divine wisdom. So, um, yeah. So why this matters is that, yeah, I think it's gonna gel well into one of the other videos that I'm gonna make. But at the end of the day, you see that every work of art is a work of theology, in my perspective. And just because something doesn't sound like what you think it should sound like, um, doesn't mean that there isn't more to the issue. So, um, yeah. So So what I'm doing is it's forcing confrontation with what theology is actually for. If God is truly the uncreated source of all reality, and Christ's triumph on the cross is cosmic and all encompassing, then a theologian doesn't need to cower in fear from raw, visceral blasphemy. Because, as I've said, that doesn't mean what many people think it means. So, um, yeah, there's so many other things that I can speak about here, but yeah. So how can I listen to a band called Archgoat or Marduk without violating my own thing? So I would say that blasphemy in black metal is often a dark form of truth telling against hypocritical institutional religion, as I've mentioned that. But um, the music itself gives voice to the real dark night of the soul, the groaning of creation, and primordial chaos. Sakis Teles said, religion for me is a hypocritical way of thinking. I don't like dogmas. I don't like people telling me what to do or how to think. I believe in human freedom, in individual choice, and in thinking for yourself. Organized religion has always been used as a tool to control people, to make them afraid, and to strip away their freedom. I'm not anti-spiritual. I'm not anti-dogma. When a religion tells you that you are born a sinner, that you must feel guilty for being human, and you must obey a priest or an institution to be saved, that is where I say, pardon me, no, that is a prison for the mind. So, something that he said also, and this goes into the whole concept of decolonial theology. In Greece, we have a very ancient history, philosophy, polytheism, freedom of thought. the pantheon of gods, mythology. Then Christianity came and destroyed all the temples, banned the ancient philosophers, and forced everyone into a single mold. For me, exploring dark metal and ancient mythology is a way of reconnecting with our true ancestral heritage before it was crushed by religious imperialism. Again, there it is. That's what a lot of black metal is about. Ancient people created gods to explain nation, season, life, and death. Modern religious religions created God to rule over human beings. There's a huge difference between reverence for nature and submission to a religious ruler. So Sakya said something interesting that I thought I might um, read as well. So when people ask if I'm a Satanist, I tell them I'm a humanist and a cultist of freedom. Satan to me is not a monster with horns living under the earth, which, as we've seen, this is not found in the actual text of Scripture. That is a Christian fairy tale used to scare children. Satan or Lucifer is a symbol of enlightenment, of knowledge, of rebellion against tyranny, and the courage to stay non-serviam. I will serve your dogma. So hopefully, everything that I've spoken about, kind of puts that into perspective, what the Bible actually says about these things. So when I use Hart's argument of what it means to, motion towards the truth, motion towards God, there are three things that I would say. The Satanist blasphemy is a rejection of an idol. When Sakistolis or Archgoat spews venom at Christ, they are not rejecting the transcendental logos who conquered death. No, read John 1, 1 and 14. They are rejecting the historical, colonial, legalistic caricature of God presented by abusive religious institutions. As Hart notes, rejecting a false God is actually a necessary step towards the true God. And I have spoken about this, and maybe I can make more videos about how I work this not Gnostic conception into my own spirituality. But the second thing is the satanic black metal ethos of I will not serve is a fundamentally, it's a quest for absolute freedom, authenticity, and sovereignty. Since God is the source of all freedom, their fiery quest for liberation, even when wrapped in satanic imagery, is a dark, inverted pilgrimage towards the divine. Third, because evil is a delusion and has no eternal ontology, the satanic rebellion of black metal is finite, if you want to call that a bad thing. But it is temporary, cathartic, screaming against spiritual bondage. In the end, when the true light shines uninhibited, even the most dedicated anti-Christian artist will see the divine as he truly is, not as the imperial tyranny they fought against, but as the cosmic beauty they were unknowingly seeking all along. But I wouldn't even say that they're necessarily doing it unknowingly. So that's what it is. If you want to understand how I can relate to and like black metal without being a cliche like of unblack metal, and that I can listen to all of these things, that's what I would say. Now, it might be too fast. I might be speaking too quickly, and you can, try to make this video slower, but that's what it is. And I hope that it was helpful for you. Thanks.